Hello, I'm Paul Bishop, and this is another episode of Running with the Pack, where I get the opportunity to talk to two of Wolfpack's authors who are also friends of mine, and we can learn all about their books and writing and techniques and anything else that comes up on the conversational table. With me today is Peter Brandvold, aka Frank Leslie, aka Mean Pete, which is the way I've known him for years, and Wayne Tilman, who is a new author to Wolfpack over the last year, who I have met, but who also has a background in law enforcement, the same as me. So we come from the same place. With Mean Pete, he comes from the same place too, but the other side of the bars.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Wrong side of the tracks, wrong side of the bars.
There you go. Pete Brandvold is one of the best-selling Western writers today. All of us are chasing him in the Amazon sales rankings, and he has several series. How many books have you written now, Pete?
I lost track, but I think over 150.
Wow. And of course, those are under at least several pseudonyms?
Yeah. Yep.
So did you start out under Peter Brandvold or under Frank Leslie?
I started out under Peter Brandvold, but then I wanted to publish more Westerns with the same company. So they didn't want me competing with myself. So they said, why don't you pick a pseudonym? That's where Frank Leslie came from.
And Frank Leslie came from a historical character, correct?
Yep, Buckskin Frank Leslie.
So that's very much the same sort of thing that went on back in the days of the pulps, where one writer would have several stories that would appear in an issue, one under his own name, usually the novelette, the lead novelette, and then several others. But we're also working under some pseudonyms with Wolfpack as well, including A.W. Hart, H-A-R-T, for the Avenging Angels series, which both of you have written for.
Right.
So tell me about the genesis of Avenging Angels, Pete.
Well, Mike wanted me to develop a series with two young people in it and a dog, and make it sort of heartwarming at the same time, heartwarming, but also, rowdy. Lots of gunfire and fisticuffs. The usual thing for a traditional Western. So I came up with Reno and Sarah, and developed that in about 2 hours one afternoon, and wrote the book. I think I wrote the book in about 4 weeks. First book, Vengeance Trail, in about 4 weeks. I had a lot of fun with that series. About he wanted it to be kind of I think he wanted it to be more of a religious, spiritual series, and I started out that way, but as I tend to do, it kind of took a little bit of a dark turn, so that their vengeance quest was, is on the surface, they're trying to do right by the Lord and get even with, exterminate vermin and evil from the earth. But, they do it in kind of a rather over the top, unchristian-like attitude, or in an unchristian-like way. So it's not really a religious series.
It's a big-time Western action series as far as I'm concerned.
A big-time Western action series.
Now, Wayne, you came on board with the Avenging Angels, and here you are presented with these two young adult twins who are out for vengeance, and yet they're also quoting the Bible and trying to do things the right way. How difficult was it for you to adapt to that already established pattern?
Well, I have to admit, Paul and Pete, I found a book on religious sayings for various events, and I used almost every page in that book. And I thought I was a good Christian, and I hope so, but I just couldn't quote all that stuff without a little bit of help. And I have to tell you that you guys really set it up well. I had more fun writing Avenging Angels, Wild Bill's Guns, than I think I've had writing any book. And I've enjoyed writing every book I ever wrote. But it was fun because I felt like it was a little more of a pulp Western. I didn't have to be quite as formal. And I could use all of those crazy old expressions that my father used to use when I was a kid, like grinning like a jackass chewing briars and sweating like a billy goat going to an election and stuff like that. So I had a good time with it, and it actually even got a few good reviews. So I love it. And I'd like to write another one. And as Paul has said, if we ever get, as I've said to Paul rather, if we ever get to the end of the series where we say, well, let's just do one more, I'd love to do the last one because I've got a killer idea for how to end this thing up. But that's down the road, I hope.
You know, the series has done very well for Wolfpack. It continues to sell well. One of the things that our listeners or viewers should know is that we write under the A.W. Hart pseudonym so that all of the readers can find us all in one place on Amazon. So in many ways, it's a way to brand this series as well as the Gunslinger series and now the Legend of the Black Rose and Concho, which are two new series that are coming out under the A.W. Hart name. And each one of the individual authors does get credit on the title page. So it's not like we're trying to hide who they are. It's just a way to streamline the process of finding these books. So if somebody enjoys the first Avenging Angels book, or they pick it up in the middle of the series, which is easy to do, they can find the other ones without any issues. Now, Pete, I understand there's a story about your grandpa sending you to the store to buy some Westerns, and that's how you first got hooked. Tell us.
No, it was my great uncle Hank. We were spending the summer at my grandmother's house, trailer house in Rugby, North Dakota. It was a very, very, very hot summer. And we were sitting around kind of bored, and he was Henry was sitting at the kitchen table drinking a bottle of Miller beer, which my mother did not like him to do. But anyway, he'd sit at the kitchen table and drink beer and he'd play solitaire for a while, or he'd teach me how to play poker. And we finally kind of burned through all our games and got bored. So he gave me a couple of bucks and he said, Pete, go down to Rexall Drug and get us a couple of Westerns. So I went down to Rexall Drug, downtown Rugby, North Dakota, spun the spinner rack a few times and picked up, I think it was a Louis L'Amour novel, and I can't remember exactly which one it was.
I understand it was Hondo.
I think it was Hondo, yeah. Hondo by Louis L'Amour and Fort Starvation by Frank Gruber. And I came back, and I don't remember having so much fun. I'd never read a Western before. I think I'd kind of flipped through my dad's Zane Grey collection, but I'd never read the contemporaries. And I tell you, I just fell absolutely in love with Louis L'Amour and Frank Gruber. Those books really captured me. We each read a book, I think, in about a day and a half, and exchanged it and sat out there, and he drank his beer and rolled his own cigarettes and smoked his cigarettes, and we read together. It was really beautiful time.
Everybody needs a great Uncle Frank.
Reading together. Hank,
great Uncle Hank.
Hank Wiltsey. Long dead.
You could not have chosen two better authors as an introduction to the Western.
I think so.
I've been a Louis L'Amour fan, but also a Frank Gruber fan who is nowhere near as well known, but should be. Mm-hmm. He wrote some terrific novels over the years coming from the pulps, and then he created Tales of Wells Fargo with Dale Robertson and wrote a lot of the stories for that. And his book, Peace Marshal, is one of my all-time favorites. He's a really solid, good writer.
Yeah.
Now, Pete, have you written outside of the Western genre?
Not really. No, I haven't. I've written a couple of horror short stories, and I did write a horror novel, but it didn't turn out very well, so I think I took it down. It was called Paradox Falls, and I wasn't really happy with the ending of it, so I thought I might retool it later and put it back up. But it's a contemporary horror novel. And other than that, I've written a few contemporary horror short stories, but that's about it. Other than that, it's been Westerns.
Now, Wayne, because of your background, you started out writing thrillers. And tell us about your beginnings in the writing field. You were still on the job at the time, correct?
I did, Paul. But my intro into writing the thrillers is almost backwards. I think my life has been backwards. But anyway, I was reading Soldier Fortune magazine, and they advertised they wanted to get a series of Vietnam novels going. And I'd been in the Marine Corps, and I had not been to Vietnam, but I had this idea about a novel for a counter-terrorist. And so I did a lot of research in the library in those days, We didn't have the internet. And so I wrote a book with a lot of help from a friend of mine. I can only say his name is Scotty. He's deceased now. But he had been one of the Jedburghs, one of the OSS agents that had trained in Jedburgh, Scotland, had parachuted into occupied France and worked with the Maquis, the French resistance. So he'd stayed in that business and finally retired from an alphabet agency, which is a term that I kind of use to describe 3 or 4 different ones that we all know. And he was kind of a mentor to me on the book. And more than the book, he convinced me that, one, I hated the financial sector where I was working, and I really wanted to be in that business. So I changed careers based on Scotty and the book and went into that business. And first had been an investigator and so forth, and then became a security contractor, and then went to work with one of the alphabet agencies, and then worked with 3 more while under the heading of one. There's a good news and bad news story. The good news is that you had some really great experience. And I will tell you, there are times that I felt like I wanted to give back my salary for the week because I was having so much fun crashing cars through barricades and shooting exotic weapons and things like that. But the bad news is, as you know, every word that I write has to be pre-vetted because of my clearance level that I had when I retired a few years ago. And I had enough as an investigator that I could write a couple of mysteries, and I did. And then the thrillers, they look at really closely, and that's okay. That's the way it should be. And that was my first love. But way back when, just like Pete, I started reading Louis L'Amour, and instead of the other author that he mentioned, Zane Grey. And I just loved those. And then, not to talk too long on this, but in 1959, I read it's either Look or Life magazine article, and I don't remember which, about Bill Tilman. And I thought, well, wait a minute, that's a familiar name. At least it's my last name. And I started studying him and found out we were distantly related. And that did it. I became a Western guy from age whatever I was in 1959, I wasn't very old, on, and finally at a conference met Hugh O'Brien, who'd been Wyatt Earp on TV, and we became friends. And he knew all about Bill Tilman because he had really studied Wyatt Earp. He knew that the character he was portraying on TV was not really the Wyatt Earp character that was real life, but he had an appreciation for the actual history. And that spurred me on even further. So I've written about half and half now between Westerns and thrillers and mysteries. And I'm not sure which I like the best because I read them both and love both of them.
How many altogether, Wayne?
How many have written?
How many books have you written altogether?
I'm way behind you, Pete. I'm on number 16.
Oh.
But at the rate I'm going, I may catch up because I just figured out I'm on number 7 in a year for Wolfpack.
Wow.
So
amazing. Yeah.
Paul has me going, and I'm having a blast with it.
Yeah. Those are fun.
But I'll never catch you, man. But it's a worthy effort, I'll tell you.
I've been cracking the whip on him, so keeping him in line.
He has,
there.
man.
Good.
You know, it's interesting that you should say that you had to get your books vetted by the government or the agency. I was, of course, working for LAPD when I first started publishing,
Right.
But, you know, the king of all police writers was Joe Wamba, who was also LAPD. And Joe was a really smart guy. He's a friend, and he told me that he went ahead knowing that there was this clause that LAPD had to approve anything that we wrote. And he just went ahead and published. And LAPD went nuts. And what that did was it gave him this tremendous publicity because the LA Times was all over it. It went to New York Times, it went all across the country. that Joe Wamba was writing these books that the LAPD didn't approve of or hadn't approved of. And he milked that for all it was worth because he knew he was on solid ground with First Amendment rights, right? So by the time I came along, Dallas Barnes, who's also a Wolfpack author and worked for LAPD, he was a little bit before me. And by the time I came along, that rule was still in place. And I would send my books in to be approved, and like a day later, they'd come back approved. So clearly nobody was reading them or caring about it. And eventually they changed that policy to only if you were writing about ongoing current cases did you have to get it approved. And that makes sense. I got no issues with it. But you saying that reminded me of that, the round and round that we went there for a while.
Oh, yeah. Well, as you know, mine take 30 to 45 days, which is a lot in your publishing schedule.
Yeah.
And so, but you know what? I believe in what they're doing, and particularly with the classified information, and I see it being abused a lot. And I wonder, how are these guys publishing that stuff? And I don't know the answer to that, and I haven't gotten involved with it, and I don't think I want to. But I'll just keep playing by the rules and keep you and me and Wolfpack clean on this thing. And
wait a minute. Playing by the rules? I think you're the only guy I know that would admit today to reading Soldier of Fortune magazine. That's about as politically incorrect as you can get.
Well, you know what? That's why my first book was published under a pseudonym, A.G. Christian. And when we tried to get the rights back to it, not to go into too much detail, but the publisher, who is a wonderful guy, actually now in his 80s, I think, sent me an email saying, yeah, you got them back. I don't know what you need, but you can have them. I own it and you got it. But then I remembered filling out for the actual publisher in New York a contract that was almost as long as the book was. And it talked about electronic rights and things like that. And I figured in a book written in 1988, they wouldn't even look for it. They'd just say no. So as you know, on the first one of the McLaughlin series, I just wrote a whole new book, and we canned the
of course, I'm of the mind that it's always better to ask for forgiveness than permission, but to each his own.
Yeah, well, I know. I played it very
you did the right
conservatively thing, because I had a new publisher, and I wanted you guys to continue to like me for a little while. Okay.
Now, Pete, you've written a number of different series. When you're thinking about the next book, where do you draw the inspiration? You don't rotate these one after the other. You sometimes write 2 or 3 in the same series and then go back to the series again. How does that work in your mind? Is it just a matter of ideas, or will one idea fit all?
Boy, you know, I think it's different for each book. I tell you, what I do is I get up early, go for a walk with my dog, and when I need to come up with a hook or a general idea for a book, I take a walk my 4 or 5 miles, and usually come back, and I have probably the general idea mapped out in my head, and probably the first 2 chapters kind of you know, sort of storyboarded in my mind, so I can just sit down and start writing. And then I don't by any means work out the entire plot in my head, but I do give myself a pretty good springboard, so that as I'm writing, it's pretty much just cause and effect. What would happen naturally after this occurs, you know? And just put a lot of action into it, you know, just really I like to just cut loose with the action, and, you know, really concentrate on characterization, because I really think that a really good traditional Western is based on characterization. Even the third tier, 4th tier characters should be, you know, very colorful. They should be in Technicolor. Everything should be in Technicolor, and it should be action-packed.
I agree, because I think that regular readers, they don't come back for action. They come back for character. That's what makes a series successful, is a character that readers want to spend time with. Now, do you have a favorite out of all your characters, or is it just whatever character you happen to be writing at the time?
Whatever character I happened to be writing at the time. I was just thinking about that today. Um, I love my Lou Prophet character. I was trying to think which one is my favorite, and I love Lou Prophet. I love writing Lou Prophet. But then I love Yakima Henry, the half breed. Kuno Massey from my 45 caliber series. I really developed these characters as individuals. They're very much alive for me, each one. So whenever I'm writing the book, it's like, well, I got my best friend in the house, and we're having a really good time together. So I think I developed them so thoroughly and in such a nice, well-rounded fashion that I love them all.
And tell me where Sheriff Ben Stillman came from. Was there an inspiration for that character?
I was climbing in the Bear Paw Mountains in south of where I was living in Montana, south of Havre, Montana. I was living on a ranch back in the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, and I was teaching on an Indian reservation. And my wife and I lived out in the middle of nowhere on a little working ranch, in a hired hand shack on a working ranch. And there were mountains all around us. So I'd every once in a while, pretty much every day, I'd take my dog out for a hike. And I was hiking up Mount Otis, and I had this idea I had this urge to start writing Westerns while I was teaching there. And I came up with this idea of a sort of a middle-aged sheriff hunting an outlaw who's kidnapped his wife. And I started to see it in the landscape out there, that he's climbing this mountain and he's trying to get over to that other mountain because this evil guy, this bad guy, has kidnapped his wife, and he's over the next ridge. And it all just started to come together in my head, a whole bunch of different characters, who the wife was, the beautiful French woman, Faye, former Faye Beaumont, and Ben Stillman. The name popped right into my head, and I had a really good picture of him as looking very, very much like probably like an aging Tom Selleck. And it was that trip up the mountain that I probably did the most productive work of any when I was coming up with the idea for that series. I wanted a middle-aged lawman who had a weakness, and the weakness was that he'd been shot in the back by accident by a drunk whore. And
okay then.
and so he had that. So he had that physical pain and the emotional pain, and he's trying to get over that. I think a really good character has to get over something else besides just what the plot is thrown in his way. I like to have something in the main character's history, that makes him human, that he is also trying to overcome. Some pain in his past.
For me, it's interesting how characters can sometimes just jump fully grown into your imagination.
Right.
It's like they are out there in the ionosphere, and all of a sudden they drop through your subconscious, and there they are. You know everything about them, and you know what they have to overcome. As you say, we have a new series starting up called Concho, which is a contemporary Western with a Texas Ranger. He is half Native American Kickapoo, which is the Indian reservation down there in Texas, and half black, and a Texas Ranger. So the Indian tribes don't like him because he's black. The blacks don't like him because he is in law enforcement. Nobody likes him for any reason whatsoever. So is this outsider that can kind of see things overall, and if he's in trouble with everybody anyway, he's just going to go and do his own thing.
Right.
And that I found intriguing. How does he work with all of this stuff? Now, Wayne, you have a very difficult concept Western that you're working with right now called Ghost Posse. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. It really is difficult. It's one of the more difficult books I've ever written because I have to keep the timelines correct, because most of the people in the book are real historical characters. There have been stories for years about each one of these characters. Start with John Wilkes Booth. When I was a little boy, my great-grandmother would tell me about walking next door to the Garrett farm and sitting in in the swing with old Miss Garrett, and Miss Garrett would tell her about the night the Union Army came to her house and burned her tobacco barn down. Oh, and by the way, killed Mr. Booth. And there were all sorts of stories about people coming up saying, "Hey, who have you got there?" "We got John Wilkes Booth." "No, you don't. That's not him. He's a famous actor. We've seen him. That's not him." And so he literally was buried under the jail. He was buried under the DC jail, which I think later became NCIS headquarters, the Navy Yard headquarters. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, pretty good evidence is that he may have died in 1903 in Enid, Oklahoma. Jump forward to Jesse James, 1882. He's shot by the dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard and laid poor Jesse in his grave. Maybe not, because there's a guy named James Courtney that lived till 1943 in Belkin, Texas, who there's some pretty good forensic evidence was probably Jesse James. Jump forward to Billy the Kid. We've all seen the movie, what is The Young Riders, where Emilio Estevez played Brushy Bill Roberts, who was really old Billy the Kid. That's a highly argued story right now, but maybe he was. So then the only other person I found in the chapter introducing him was The Most Hated Man. And this one I haven't mentioned to you. This is your surprise, Paul. Captain William Clark Quantrill. He was the Confederate raider who annihilated Lawrence, Kansas. He was just a bloodthirsty guy, and he was so mean that that Jesse and Frank James rode with him, and they just quit. They said, "We're not going with you anymore. You're crazy." And so we've got all these guys, and he apparently, there's a chance he walked out of a hospital in Kentucky after being shot in June of '65, after the war had officially ended, wearing his wife's dress and hiding his beard with a shawl around his face. That's just too good not to use, Paul. So I put him in the Ghost Posse, and the Ghost Posse goes after John Wilkes Booth's daughter, who was a real life actress, and until recently nobody realized that he had a wife and a daughter. Oh. And so that's the basic story here. And
you're taking these guys who are supposedly dead under other circumstances, right, who are living as ghosts, and now they have to come together to one last time.
One last time as a Ghost Posse. I'm sorry?
Great premise.
It's so I hope I can give it justice. I think it seems to be working out right now. And I threw in a character, an almost paladin-like character that's leading them, and the funding source is the Knights of the Golden Circle, which a lot of people think ended up with the Confederacy's gold reserves after the war. And so you've got all of these suppositions. It's just too juicy to not write a novel. Yep. Is any of it true? Well, I know the part about the girl being kidnapped is not true. I made that up. But Billy the Kid, by the way, probably wasn't shot by Garrett, as well, I had said that. But in one of these stories could be or could not be true. I don't care. It's fiction. Right. And if somebody comes back and reviews it and says, well, blah, 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 it's fiction.
It's fiction. It's fun. Just go with it.
It's fun.
Yeah.
So I've had a good time writing it, Paul, and I think I hope you're going to like the product. I think I'm going to be about ready in a week and a half.
I've loved it since you first mentioned it, and it's interesting that you mentioned again Paladin. Now, Pete, you grew up in a time period when Westerns were all over the TVs. Did you have a favorite show that you would watch?
Oh, Gunsmoke for sure. I also liked Lancer. Like High Chaparral. I wasn't a huge fan of Bonanza, but The Virginian, of course. I love The Virginian. I rewatch those episodes now, even today. Of course, Gunsmoke, because you grow up. I mean, Matt Dillon, who can top Matt Dillon, you know, as the iconic Western character.
Especially in the early episodes.
Yeah.
I've recently, in the last few years, caught up with those early episodes because I wasn't really a Gunsmoke fan, but those early episodes really sold me. They were so well written.
Yeah.
And interesting that you should mention Lancer. I have a Six Gun Justice podcast, Speed Listen, coming up on Lancer in a couple of weeks. It's a really highly underrated series that has only come back into the public consciousness because of what Quentin Tarantino did with it in his film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It was originally written off as just a Bonanza clone, but it really wasn't, because it had a real dark side to it. Everybody in a Bonanza gets along. It's one big, nice, happy family, and I think that's why I don't care for it. But in Lancer, everybody hated each other, but they had to pull together because of circumstances. And you know, the same way with High Chaparral and Big Valley. I think there was far more conflict in those series, even though they were still family clan oriented, than in Bonanza. Bonanza was just a little too soft for me.
Me too. Too generic.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people love Bonanza. It's one of the biggest, you know, most popular shows of all time, and that's great. It really is comfort viewing. Yeah. But some of the other ones are really what held my attention more so.
Yeah, I wish they would bring Lancer back to television. You know, run it in syndication. I don't know why they're not. I wonder. I just wonder why they're not.
You know, again, you would think that the rights would be available because obviously Tarantino got them, so he probably holds them now. Yeah. And if any, he has made noises about doing that, but he makes noises about doing a lot of things that just never really come to fruition. He does a lot of stuff for publicity's sake.
Right.
Now, Wayne, when you sit down to start writing a book, right, do you sit down there and stare at the blank page, or do you, like Pete, have a couple of chapters in mind and the characters?
I pretty much have the chapters in mind, Paul. I've got so many unwritten books floating around. The Ghost Posse has been floating around for almost 30 years. And finally, you convinced me to bring it out and work it. Every now and then I'll come up with a character, and I may not write something for that character now, but I'll keep the character. I don't take notes. I don't use 3x5 cards or 4x6 cards. I keep it all in my diminishing brain. And for example, your friend and now mine, Rich Prush, is putting together an anthology. And I wrote and it's a really great concept about a Western where every short story happened primarily in the dark. And I think it's Under Western Skies or something is the name, at least the initial name. So I wrote something about a Wells Fargo detective. I had done some research and realized that Wells Fargo detectives were held in as high esteem as Pinkerton detectives during their heyday in the 1850s through 1900. Yeah. And Jim Hume ran them up until his death in his 70s. And so I came up with this character, and it was so good, I called Rich and said, hey, can I write a book on this character? Would I be stepping on your copyright if I did that? And he said, no, just don't use the same story. So the Wells Fargo book that is pretty much through the process of at Wolfpack is really one of my favorite books I've ever written. I like the character.
That's Gun for Wells Fargo, which I think is coming out very soon. I actually just saw the cover for the first time yesterday. Oh. And it fits right in with a number of your other covers, such as Arizona Gunman and several others. But it's a book that I'm excited about, and I'm excited about it doing well when it's released sometime in the next month, I believe.
Thanks. I'm excited about it too, Paul. I really am. So to get back to your question very quickly, I do have these characters. I never start with a blank page. I always have some idea where I'm going, just not how I'm going to get there. And that's the hard but the fun part of being a writer, I think. How do you get there?
Yep.
And Yeah. Pete, let me ask you a question. Do you always know how your books are going to end, or do
Never,
you just write them?
never.
I don't either.
I don't want to know until I get there. That's the fun. I like to get up every day, and I remember hearing this story about Louis L'Amour. He's typing really fast, typewriter's bouncing all over the place, and his daughter comes up to him and says, "Daddy, why are you writing so fast?" And he says, "Because I want to know what happens next." That's the way I am.
That's a great story. I'm glad to hear that, because you're the man on Westerns, and I thought I was crazy by not knowing what the ending was going to be, but I feel better about it now. Thank you, sir.
I often never know what the next scene is going to be until I wake up the next day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to know until it just comes time. Sometimes I don't like to know ahead of time, because half the thrill is sitting down and just staring at the blank screen and seeing what's going to come out,
Yeah.
Surprising myself. Keeps it fresh.
Pete, I know that you are very widely read and eclectically read when it comes to other books. You often talk about some of the classics that you're reading at the time, or some that you're revisiting. Can you give me one book that most influenced you in your life?
The Sea Wolf by Jack London.
And why that book?
The realism, I think. The grotesque being kind of offset by the humor. The daring do, of course, the sense of peril through every chapter, the sense of menace that's in the character of Wolf Larsen. The adventure of it, that book pretty much epitomizes to me everything that a good novel should be. Really clear characters, a very clear villain, a very clearly established hero, even we don't really like the hero all that much all the time. The crispness and vividness of and the pungency of London's prose. I love London's prose. Whenever I'm having a little bit of a hard time, all I need to do is just reach over and pull a volume of Jack London down and get that voice. It kind of gives me courage, and just hearing that voice, it's like hearing a good piece of music. It puts you in a good mood
and brings you back to where you need to be to carry on.
Right. Yeah.
Now, Wayne, is there a single book that you've read in your lifetime that you return to again and again?
Not so much a book, but a series, and it's nowhere near as lofty as Pete's. As a very young guy, that would have been my case just after the war between the states, I started reading Zane Grey. And by the time I hit about the 7th grade, I wrote instead of a book report, I wrote a kind of an omnibus book report on Zane Grey. And I shared my discovery, which everybody else probably has known for years, and I figured it out in the 7th grade, finally. And that is that he wrote with a template. All of his books are basically the same. Different part of Arizona, different part of wherever, different names, but basically a gunfighter tries to quit, goes off in the wilderness, hides the fact he's a gunfighter, takes a different name, discovers that there's an uncle or somebody that is mistreating some beautiful girl. He falls in love with the girl. He ends up in the shootout. The girl puts on a white dress, and you know that he's won her when she shows up in the white dress.
Hey, wait a minute. This is the story of my life you're telling here.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get into that so much. But the template is not such a bad idea. And Louis L'Amour pretty much did the same thing. And I guess a lot of great authors do it. And I've learned from that. And I've learned from, I have a great editor who gave me this kind of a Bible on things about write short sentences, don't use the word that. It's made me a better writer. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a great Hemingway fan, but I do respect his short sentences and his readability. And I've been trying to emulate that. And that's hard because I was kind of the self-anointed king of complex sentences. And Paul has weaned me away from that a little bit, Pete.
It's amazing how Hemingway is both very simple and, you know, the prose is very simple and he uses very simple words, and yet how he can paint such a vivid picture in your mind using so few very ordinary words.
Yes.
It's just amazing, isn't it? You
Yeah,
read a
it really
page of
is.
Hemingway, you read a page of Hemingway, and it's like watching a movie in Technicolor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I
very
sometimes,
short, simple sentences.
yeah, I'm sometimes a little colored by his personal life, and he was a rough character.
Yeah.
But his brilliance is just amazing, and I can't begin to copy it, but I can try to shorten my sentences, and I've learned a lot from the guy on the other end of the screen from us too.
Yeah, I would have to say that would be my second most influential book would be The Sun Also Rises, as well as the short stories in our time. Yeah. Probably nothing has influenced my own prose like the stories in our time.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for being with us on this episode of Running with the Pack. I really appreciate both of you taking time out of your writing days. And
thanks, Paul.
Now I'm going to have to crack the whip and make sure that you get back and get your word done for the day. Bye, guys.
Thanks a lot. That was fun.
See you, Pete.
See you later, Wayne. Take her easy.
You too.